Today is Pentecost Sunday, a day when we celebrate God as Holy Spirit, who blesses us through the miraculous gift of life within the whole creation and wakes us up when we are disconnected and distorted from that life. The day is full of images of wind and breath and fire and language, all natural images that invoke a sense of the power and mystery of life. I love the stories that we hear from the earth sciences. Apparently, our gorgeous blue-green planet Earth is wrapped in a protective veil that we call the atmosphere, which separates the air we breathe from the cold vacuum of outer space. Beneath this veil is all the air that ever was. The same ancient air just keeps recirculating, which means that every time any one of us breathes, we breathe stardust left over from the very beginning of the creation of the earth. We breathe brontosaurus breath and pterodactyl breath. We breathe air that has circulated through the rainforests of Kenya and air that has turned yellow with sulfur over Beijing. We breathe the same air that Plato breathed and Mozart and Michelangelo, not to mention Hitler, and of course, let's not forget Jesus. Every time we breathe, we take in what was once some baby's first breath or some dying person's last. We take it in, we use it to live, and when we breathe out, it carries some of us with it into the next person or tree or Canada goose who uses it to live. When Jesus let go of his last breath, willingly and intentionally, we believe, for love of us, that breath was set loose on earth. John's Gospel tells us that the risen Christ breathed on the disciples immediately following his resurrection. Luke tells us that that breath grew in power and strength, so full of passion, so full of life, until it was a mighty wind which God sent spinning through an upper room in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, 50 days later. Before any of the disciples knew what was happening, the mighty wind had blown through the entire house, striking sparks that burst into flames above their heads, and every one of them was filled with the breath of God. Then something even more amazing happened. The air came out of them in languages they did not even know they knew. People from all over the world were in Jerusalem for the festival of Pentecost, and they heard them. They were surprised to hear their own language spoken so far away from home, all of them speaking powerfully and joyfully about God's love and a dream of a different world. Before the day was over, the church had grown from 120 to more than 3,000. Shy people had become bold, scared people had become gutsy, and lost people had found a sure sense of direction. Fearful people were turned into a force that changed the history of the world. We celebrate that same Holy Spirit today as the beginning of the church over 2,000 years ago. But there is an uncontrollable wildness about the Holy Spirit, and most of us tend to steer pretty well clear of it. Our modern technological society is built upon studying and taming and controlling this wild power, not releasing it. This wild power of fire and wind and water and speech underlies almost everything around us these days in our energy-driven information age. We use the word viral and wildfire to talk about the way this wild power can often spread. Indeed, right now, we are dealing with an actual virus that is affecting and threatening the whole human world. Until this week, most of us thought this virus was the only pandemic we have to worry about. But this weekend, we are witnessing an eruption of power gone terribly wrong in Minnesota. Some of us have been witnessing through video of the cold and brutal murder of a black man named George Floyd. No declaration of curfew has been able to stop the anger and pain that is spreading like a pandemic wildfire among the people of cities around the United States. Protesters are pouring out into the streets. Our screens are full of the images of whole neighborhoods up in flames. There is looting and violence, and the president is sending in the troops against their own people. And as much as I want to celebrate this day of joy, I can do nothing but weep for George Floyd, who was crying out simply, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." I weep too for all the people who have been living with police violence as a part of their daily lives. They are just sick of it. I know that God weeps with me. As matters escalate, I am praying that the different world which Jesus envisioned and his disciples began to create is not just another impossible dream. It seems we need another Pentecost. Come, Holy Spirit, come.